The state has the supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty is to be a member of the state, for the right of the world spirit is above all special privileges. Author-historian William Shirer, quoting George Hegel in his The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, 1959, page 144. In 1847 the London Communist League, Karl Marx, and Friedrich Engels, used Hegel's theory of the dialectic to back up their economic theory of communism. Now, in the 21st century, Hegelian Marxist thinking affects our entire social and political structure. The Hegelian dialectic is the framework for guiding our thoughts and actions into conflicts that lead us to a predetermined solution. If we do not understand how the Hegelian dialectic shapes our perceptions of the world, then we do not know how we are helping to implement the vision. When we remain locked into dialectical thinking, we cannot see out of the box. Hegel's dialectic is the tool which manipulates us into a frenzied circular pattern of thought and action. Every time we fight for, or defend against an ideology, we are playing a necessary role in Marx and Engels' grand design to advance humanity into a dictatorship of the proletariat. The synthetic Hegelian solution to all these conflicts cannot be introduced, unless we all take a side that will advance the agenda. The Marxists' global agenda is moving along at breakneck speed. The only way to completely stop the privacy invasions, expanding domestic police powers, land grabs, insane wars against inanimate objects, and transient verbs, covert actions, and outright assaults on individual liberty, is to step outside the dialectic. This releases us from the limitations of controlled and guided thought. When we understand what motivated Hegel, we can see his influence on all of our destinies. Hegelian conflicts steer every political arena on the planet, from the United Nations to the major American political parties, all the way down to local school boards and community councils. Dialogues and consensus building are primary tools of the dialectic, and terror and intimidation are also acceptable formats for obtaining the goal. The ultimate third-way agenda is world government. Once we get what's really going on, we can cut the strings and move our lives in original directions outside the confines of the dialectical madness. Focusing on Hegel's and Engels' ultimate agenda, and avoiding getting caught up in their impenetrable theories of social evolution, gives us the opportunity to think and act our way toward freedom, justice, and genuine liberty for all. We can see it in environmentalists instigating conflicts against private property owners, in Democrats against Republicans, in Greens against Libertarians, in Communists against Socialists, in neocons against traditional conservatives, in community activists against individuals, in pro-choice versus pro-life, in Christians against Muslims, in isolationists versus interventionists, in peace activists against war hawks. No matter what the issue, the invisible dialectic aims to control both the conflict and the resolution of differences, and leads everyone involved into a new cycle of conflicts. We are definitely not in Kansas anymore. Definitions. Merriam-Webster. Dialectic, the Hegelian process of change in which a concept, or its realization passes over into and is preserved and fulfilled by its opposite development through the stages of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis in accordance with the laws of dialectical materialism, any systematic reasoning, exposition, or argument that juxtaposes opposed or contradictory ideas, and usually seeks to resolve their conflict, the dialectical tension or opposition between two interacting forces or elements. Dialectical materialism, the Marxist theory, that maintains the material basis of reality constantly changing in a dialectical process, and the priority of matter over mind. Hegel's dialectic often appears broken up for convenience into three moments called thesis, in the French historical example, the Revolution, antithesis the terror which followed, and synthesis the constitutional state of free citizens. Much Hegel scholarship does not recognize the usefulness of this triadic classification for shedding light on Hegel's thought. Although Hegel refers to the two elemental considerations, first, the idea of freedom as the absolute and final aim, secondly, the means for realizing it, i.e. the subjective side of knowledge and will, with its life, movement, and activity thesis, and antithesis. He doesn't use synthesis, but instead speaks of the whole. We then recognize the state as the moral whole, and the reality of freedom, and consequently, as the objective unity of these two elements. Hegel used this system of dialectics to explain the whole of the history of philosophy, science, art, politics, and religion, but many modern critics point out that Hegel often seems to gloss over the realities of history in order to fit it into his dialectical mold. In the 20th century, Hegel's philosophy underwent a major renaissance. This was due partly to the rediscovery and re-evaluation of him as the philosophical progenitor of Marxism by philosophically oriented Marxists, partly through a resurgence of the historical perspective that Hegel brought to everything, and partly through increasing recognition of the importance of his dialectical method. The book that did the most to reintroduce Hegel into the Marxist canon was perhaps George Lukács's History and Class Consciousness. This sparked a renewed interest in Hegel reflected in the work of Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, Ernst Bloch. The Hegelian dialectical formula, D, thesis, versus B, antithesis, equals C, synthesis. For example, if B, my idea of freedom conflicts with B, your idea of freedom, then, C, neither of us can be free until everyone agrees to be a slave. The Soviet Union was based on the Hegelian dialectic, as is all Marxist writing. The Soviets didn't give up their Hegelian reasoning when they supposedly stopped being a communist country. They merely changed the dialectical language to fit into the modern version of Marxist thinking called communitarianism. American author Steve Montgomery explores Moscow's adept use of the Hegelian dialectic in Glasnow's Perestroika, a model Potemkin village. Let's just have one thing perfectly clear in here. Russia and communism are not synonymous. Russia simply was in the unfortunate position of being communism's first victim. How is it possible to consider a Hegelian argument? If the ideas, interpretations of experiences, and the sources are all wrong, can a conclusion based on all these wrong premises be sound? The answer is no. Two false premises do not make a sound conclusion even if the argument follows the formula. 3, 4, 5, or 6 false premises do not all combine to make a conclusion sound. You must have at least one sound premise to reach a sound conclusion. Logical mathematical formulas are only the basis for deductive reasoning. Equally important is knowledge of semantics, or considering the meanings of the words used in the argument. Just because an argument fits a formula, it does not necessarily make the conclusion sound. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel knew this when he designed his dialectic. Hegel is an imperialist con artist, who established the principles of dialectical no reason. Hegel's dialectic has allowed globalists to lead simple, capable, free-born men and women back into the superstitious, racist, and unreasonable age of imperial global dominance. National governments represent people who are free from imperial controls over private property, trade, and production. National governments protect their workers from imperial slavery by protecting the workers' markets. But if you use Hegel's logical Marxism, the only way to protect people from slavery is to become the slave trader, just for a while. Twisted logic is why cons are so successful, and Hegel twisted it in such a way as to be impenetrable. Like Hegel and Marx, the best street con knows his peel has to use logic to bend and distort the story, and good cons weave their lies on logical mathematical progression. The fallacy is in the language, not in the math. Detective Philip Wert's 2001 article Communist-Oriented Policing is a nice explanation of dialectical materialism's influence on America. The communitarian purpose for the Hegelian dialectic. Hegel's theory is basically that mankind is merely a series of constant philosophical conflicts. Hegel was an idealist who believed that the highest state of mankind can only be attained through constant ideological conflict and resolution. The rules of the dialectic means mankind can only reach its highest spiritual consciousness through endless self-perpetuating struggle between ideals, and the eventual synthesizing of all opposites. Hegel's dialectic taught all conflict takes man to the next spiritual level. But in the final analysis, this ideology simply justifies conflict and endless war.